The operating room at New York's prestigious St. Elizabeth Hospital buzzed with tension as Dr. Richard Allen, the hospital's star surgeon, prepared for a complex cardiac procedure. His reputation preceded him: brilliant, innovative, but notoriously difficult to work with. As he entered, the room fell silent, all eyes on him. "Scalpel," he commanded, his voice crisp and authoritative. A nurse quickly handed him the instrument. Dr. Allen's hands moved with precision, making the initial incision. The team watched in awe as he navigated the intricate maze of the patient's heart, his movements fluid and assured. Hours into the surgery, a monitor beeped urgently. "Blood pressure's dropping," announced the anesthesiologist. Without missing a beat, Dr. Allen barked orders, his tone sharp and impatient. "I need more suction here, now!" He snapped at a nurse who was a fraction too slow for his liking. As the crisis passed and the patient stabilized, Dr. Allen's scowl deepened. "If you can't keep up, you don't belong in my OR," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. The nurse's face flushed with embarrassment, but she remained silent. The surgery concluded successfully, and as Dr. Allen stripped off his gloves, he turned to the team. "Adequate work, everyone," he said, his tone making it clear that adequate was far from a compliment. "Next time, try to be less of a hindrance." With that, he strode out, leaving a wake of mixed emotions: relief at the surgery's success, resentment at his attitude. Later that day, Dr. Allen sat in his office reviewing patient files. A knock at the door interrupted his concentration. "Enter," he called out, not bothering to look up. Simone Johnson, a young African-American nurse, stepped in. "Dr. Allen, I have the updated charts you requested," she said, her voice steady despite the nervousness she felt in his presence. "Doctor?" Allen glanced up, his eyes cold. "About time," he muttered, snatching the files from her hands. As he flipped through the pages, his frown deepened. "What's this?" he demanded, pointing at a notation. Simone leaned in to look. "That's the patient's updated medication list, sir," she explained. "I can see that," Dr. Allen snapped. "What I want to know is why it's written in this chicken scratch. Are you incapable of clear penmanship, Nurse Johnson?" Simone bristled at his tone, but kept her composure. "I apologize if it's not clear, Dr. Allen. I'll make sure to..." "Make sure to what? Do your job properly?" he interrupted. "This is a hospital, not a kindergarten. Lives depend on accurate information. Or is that concept too difficult for you to grasp?" Simone's cheeks burned with humiliation and anger. "I understand perfectly, Dr. Allen. It won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," he dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "And while you're at it, redo these charts. I want them back on my desk in an hour, and this time try to remember that you're a professional, not a child scribbling in a coloring book." Simone turned to leave, fighting back tears of frustration. As she reached for the door handle, it swung open, revealing a distinguished-looking older man in an expensive suit. "Simone!" The man's voice was filled with concern. "Is everything all right?" Dr. Allen looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "Excuse me, this is a private office. Who are you?" The man's eyes narrowed as he took in the scene, his daughter's distressed face, the arrogant doctor's dismissive attitude. "I'm Charles Miller," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority that comes with wealth and influence. "And I believe you owe my daughter an apology." Dr. Allen's face paled as recognition dawned. Charles Miller was not just any visitor. He was one of the hospital's most generous benefactors, a millionaire whose donations had funded entire wings of the building. "Your daughter?" Dr. Allen stammered, his usual confidence evaporating. "Yes, my daughter." Mr. Miller's voice was like steel. "Simone Johnson Miller, the nurse you just berated for no good reason." Dr. Allen's mind raced, trying to find a way to salvage the situation. "Mr. Miller, I assure you there's been a misunderstanding." "I heard exactly what you were simply doing," Mr. Miller cut him off. "Belittling a dedicated professional, making racist assumptions about her competence, and creating a hostile work environment. Is this how you treat all your staff, Dr. Allen? Simone, recovering from her shock, placed a hand on her father's arm. Dad, it's okay. I can handle— No, it's not okay, Mr. Miller insisted. He turned to Dr. Allen, his eyes blazing. I've heard rumors about your behavior, Dr. Allen, but I dismissed them as professional jealousy. Now I see they were understated, if anything. Dr. Allen stood, trying to regain control of the situation. Mr. Miller, I apologize if my words were misconstrued. I assure you, I have the utmost respect for all our staff. Save it, Mr. Miller interrupted. Your actions speak louder than your words ever could. He turned to the door and called out, Dr. Harrison, could you join us, please? The hospital's chief of staff appeared in the doorway, looking concerned. Mr. Miller, what's going on? What's going on is that I'm calling for the immediate dismissal of Dr. Richard Allen, Mr. Miller stated firmly. And if the board has any objections, they can take it up with me personally. I will not continue to support an institution that allows this kind of behavior to go unchecked. Dr. Harrison's face paled. Mr. Miller, surely we can discuss this. There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Miller said. Either Dr. Allen goes, or my donations do. It's that simple. As the reality of the situation sank in, Dr. Allen's arrogance crumbled. He looked from Simone to Mr. Miller to Dr. Harrison, realizing that his career at St. Elizabeth's was over. In a matter of minutes, his world had turned upside down, all because of his own actions. Mr. Miller put an arm around Simone's shoulders. Come on, sweetheart. Let's let them sort out the details. You and I have a lot to talk about. As they left the office, Simone couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Relief at finally seeing Dr. Allen face consequences for his actions, anxiety about the repercussions this would have on her career, and a growing determination to use this moment as a catalyst for change in the hospital's culture. The news of Dr. Allen's dismissal would soon spread through the hospital like wildfire, marking the beginning of a tumultuous period of self-examination and transformation for the entire institution. And at the center of it all was Simone Johnson Miller, a young nurse whose quiet strength was about to reshape the future of St. Elizabeth's Hospital. The news of Dr. Richard Allen's abrupt dismissal spread through St. Elizabeth's Hospital like a shockwave. By mid-morning, every corridor buzzed with whispered conversations and speculative glances. Nurses huddled at their stations, surgeons congregated in break rooms, and even patients sensed the shift in the hospital's atmosphere. In the cafeteria, a group of residents sat hunched over their coffee cups, their voices low but animated. I can't believe it, said one, shaking his head. Dr. Allen was untouchable. What could have happened? I heard he insulted some big shot's daughter, another chimed in. Apparently she's a nurse here. A third resident snorted. Allen insulting someone? That's not news. The guy's been doing that since day one. As the day progressed, the initial shock gave way to a mixed bag of reactions. Some staff members, particularly those who had been on the receiving end of Dr. Allen's sharp tongue, couldn't hide their relief. Others, especially those who had benefited from his mentorship or admired his surgical skills, expressed concern about the impact on the hospital's reputation. Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of cardiology, called an emergency meeting with her team. I know you've all heard about Dr. Allen, she began, her tone serious. While I can't discuss the details, I want to assure you that our department will continue to provide the highest level of care to our patients. We're a team, and we'll get through this together. Meanwhile, in the hospital's administrative offices, chaos reigned. The board of directors had convened an emergency session, and raised voices could be heard through the closed doors. The hospital's PR team worked frantically, drafting statements and fielding calls from curious journalists who had caught wind of the story. Amidst all this, Simone Johnson found herself at the eye of the storm. As she made her rounds, she could feel the weight of curious stares following her. Whispers trailed in her wake, some supportive, others tinged with resentment. Did you hear? That's her, the one who got Allen fired. I can't believe she'd use her daddy's influence like that. It's not fair. Good for her. It's about time someone stood up to that bully. Simone tried to keep her head high and focus on her work, but the constant attention was draining. During her lunch break, she retreated to a quiet corner of the staff room, hoping for a moment of peace. "Mind if I join you?" a voice asked. Simone looked up to see Maria, one of the senior nurses, holding a tray. "Please." Simone gestured to the empty chair, grateful for a friendly face. Maria sat down, her eyes kind but searching. "How are you holding up, honey? It's been quite a day." Simone sighed, her shoulders sagging. I don't know. It's all happening so fast. I never meant for things to explode like this." Maria reached out, patting Simone's hand. "Listen to me. You did nothing wrong. Dr. Allen had this coming for a long time. You were just the catalyst." Simone looked up, surprised. "You mean you don't think I overreacted?" Maria's laugh was tinged with bitterness. "Overreacted? Honey, if anything, this was long overdue. Allen's been terrorizing staff for years, especially nurses and people of color. You're not the first he's insulted, but you might be the last." As they talked, other nurses began to drift over. Soon Simone found herself surrounded by a group of supportive colleagues, each with their own story to share. "He once made me cry during a surgery," confessed Lisa, a usually stoic OR nurse. "Called me incompetent in front of everyone because I couldn't anticipate what instrument he wanted before he asked for it. I overheard him telling a patient not to worry because he was a real doctor, not like those affirmative action hires," added James, an African-American resident. "I wanted to report him, but I was afraid it would hurt my career." As Simone listened to story after story, she felt a mix of emotions washing over her. Anger at the injustice her colleagues had faced, guilt for not speaking up sooner, and underneath it all, a growing determination to ensure that what happened to her and others would never happen again. "We can't let this be the end of it," she said finally, her voice firm. "Dr. Allen may be gone, but the system that protected him for so long is still in place. We need to change that." The others nodded in agreement, a sense of purpose replacing their earlier trepidation. "What do you have in mind?" Maria asked. "I'm not sure yet," Simone admitted. "But I know we need to stick together, document everything, speak up when we see something wrong, and push for real systemic changes in how the hospital handles discrimination and harassment." As the group began to brainstorm ideas, Simone felt a renewed sense of energy. The day's events, traumatic as they were, had awakened something in her, a leadership quality she hadn't known she possessed. Later that afternoon, Simone received a call from her father. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" Charles Miller's voice was filled with concern. "I'm okay, Dad," Simone assured him. "It's been a crazy day, but I'm hanging in there." "I'm so proud of you, Simone," Charles said. "You stood up for yourself, and in doing so, you're standing up for others too. That takes real courage." Simone felt a lump in her throat. "Thanks, Dad. I just hope I'm doing the right thing." "You are," Charles affirmed, "and I want you to know that I'm behind you 100%. Whatever you need to make real changes at that hospital, you've got my support." As she hung up the phone, Simone felt a mixture of gratitude and resolve. Her father's influence had set today's events in motion, but it would be up to her to see them through. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But she also knew that she wasn't alone. Looking out the window at the sprawling hospital complex, Simone made a silent promise to herself and to every colleague who had ever felt belittled, marginalized, or discriminated against. This was more than just about one arrogant doctor or one incident of humiliation. It was about changing the culture of an entire institution, about fighting for equality and respect in a place dedicated to healing. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the hospital grounds, Simone Johnson squared her shoulders and took a deep breath. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but it would also bring new opportunities. and she was ready to face them head-on. The following week at St. Elizabeth's Hospital was a whirlwind of activity. Simone Johnson, fueled by a newfound sense of purpose, began to organize a grassroots campaign for change within the hospital. She started by reaching out to the colleagues who had shared their stories with her, forming a core group of committed individuals. On a Tuesday evening, after their shifts had ended, Simone and her allies gathered in a small conference room. The air was thick with anticipation as Simone stood to address the group. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "What happened with Dr. Allen was just the tip of the iceberg. We have an opportunity now to address the deeper issues of discrimination and inequality in our workplace." Maria, the senior nurse who had first supported Simone, nodded in agreement. "We need to make sure this isn't just a one-time thing. The hospital can't just fire one bad apple and call it a day." James, the resident who had shared his own experience of discrimination, leaned forward. "What exactly are we proposing? We need concrete goals." Simone took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about that. We need to push for comprehensive diversity and inclusion training for all staff, from the board of directors down to the janitorial staff. We need clear, enforceable policies against discrimination and harassment. And we need better representation in leadership positions." The room buzzed with discussion as people shared ideas and concerns. Lisa, the OR nurse, raised her hand. "What about the patients? I've seen doctors treat patients of color differently. We need to address that too." Simone nodded, making a note. "Absolutely. We should look into cultural competency training and maybe even audit patient outcomes based on race and socioeconomic status." As the meeting progressed, the group's enthusiasm grew. They formed committees, assigned tasks, and set a timeline for their campaign. Simone felt a surge of pride as she watched her colleagues take ownership of the cause. Meanwhile, across town, Dr. Richard Allen sat in his luxurious apartment, staring blankly at the New York skyline. The past week had been a nightmare of sleepless nights and frantic calls to colleagues and lawyers. His dismissal from St. Elizabeth's had sent shockwaves through the medical community, and he found himself suddenly persona non grata in the circles he once dominated. As he nursed a glass of scotch, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from a former colleague expressing sympathy for his situation, but quietly distancing himself from any association. Allen threw the phone across the room in frustration. For the first time in his life, Richard Allen was forced to confront the consequences of his actions. The arrogance that had propelled him to the top of his field now left him isolated and despised. As he replayed the confrontation with Simone and her father in his mind, he felt a twinge of something unfamiliar: regret. In a moment of clarity, Allen realized that his behavior hadn't just cost him his job, it had cost him his integrity, his relationships, and his self-respect. The realization hit him like a physical blow, leaving him gasping for air. With shaking hands, he pulled out his laptop and began to search. "Understanding systemic racism," he typed, then hesitated before hitting enter. It was a small step, but it was a start. Back at the hospital, Simone's campaign was gaining momentum. Word spread quickly, and soon staff members from all departments were approaching her with their own stories and ideas. Even some patients, hearing about the initiative, offered their support. Charles Miller, true to his word, threw his considerable influence behind his daughter's efforts. He arranged meetings with key board members, using his status as a major donor to ensure Simone's voice was heard at the highest levels. One afternoon, as Simone was reviewing some proposal drafts in the cafeteria, she was approached by Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of cardiology. "Ms. Johnson," Dr. Chen said, her tone formal but not unkind, "I wonder if I might have a word." Simone nodded, gesturing for the doctor to take a seat. Dr. Chen looked uncomfortable as she settled into the chair. "I wanted to talk to you about this campaign you're running," she began. While I appreciate your enthusiasm, I'm concerned about the potential disruption to hospital operations. Simone felt a flicker of disappointment, but kept her expression neutral. I understand your concern, Dr. Chen, but don't you think addressing these issues will ultimately improve our operations? Happy, respected staff means better patient care. Dr. Chen sighed. It's not that simple. Change takes time, and we have to be careful not to alienate some of our more traditional staff members and donors. Simone leaned forward, her eyes intense. With all due respect, Dr. Chen, isn't that exactly the kind of thinking that allowed someone like Dr. Allen to thrive for so long? At what point do we decide that doing the right thing is more important than maintaining the status quo? The two women locked eyes for a long moment. Finally, Dr. Chen's shoulders sagged slightly. You make a fair point, Ms. Johnson. I can't promise I'll agree with all your proposals, but I'm willing to listen. Maybe it's time for some changes around here. As Dr. Chen walked away, Simone felt a small thrill of victory. It wasn't full support, but it was a start. She knew that changing entrenched systems and attitudes would be a long, difficult process. But every small win, every mind open to new possibilities, was a step in the right direction. That evening, as Simone packed up her things to head home, she received a text from her father. "Dinner tonight. I want to hear all about your progress." Over pasta at their favorite Italian restaurant, Simone filled Charles in on the week's developments. His eyes shone with pride as he listened to her plans and strategies. "You know, Simone," he said as they finished their meal, "when I confronted Dr. Allen that day, I was acting on instinct, a father protecting his daughter. But you're turning this into something much bigger. You're not just reacting, you're creating real change." Simone felt a warmth spread through her chest at her father's words. "I couldn't do it without your support, Dad." Charles reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You have my support always, but this is all you, sweetheart. You're becoming a leader, and I couldn't be more proud." But as they left the restaurant, walking arm in arm down the busy New York street, Simone felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything she'd experienced before. The road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. Back in his apartment, Richard Allen closed his laptop, his mind reeling from hours of reading about privilege, systemic racism, and unconscious bias. He had a long way to go, but for the first time in years he felt like he was on a path to becoming a better person, not just a better doctor. As the city lights twinkled outside his window, Allen made a decision. He couldn't change the past, but he could use his experience to help create a better future. Tomorrow, he would reach out to Simone Johnson and offer his support for her campaign. It wouldn't erase what he'd done, but it would be a start. The wheels of change were turning at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. As weeks passed, Simone's campaign for diversity and inclusion at St. Elizabeth's Hospital gained significant traction. Her once small group of supporters had grown into a formidable coalition, representing staff from every department and level of the hospital hierarchy. On a crisp autumn morning, Simone stood before the hospital's board of directors, her heart racing but her voice steady as she presented their proposals. The boardroom was silent as she spoke, laying out a comprehensive plan for change. "Ladies and gentlemen," Simone concluded, "these measures aren't just about doing the right thing morally. They're about improving patient outcomes, increasing staff retention, and ultimately making St. Elizabeth's a leader in equitable healthcare. Thank you for your time." As Simone took her seat, she could feel the weight of the board members' stares. Dr. Harrison, the chief of staff, cleared his throat. "Ms. Johnson, your presentation was illuminating. We'll need time to discuss and consider these proposals, of course." Simone nodded, understanding that this was neither an acceptance nor a rejection. As she left the boardroom, she was met by a small crowd of supportive colleagues who had been waiting anxiously outside. Their faces told her that, regardless of the board's decision, she had already made a significant impact. Meanwhile, across town, Richard Allen was embarking on his own journey of transformation. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of self-reflection and education. He had joined online discussion groups, attended workshops on unconscious bias, and even volunteered at a community health clinic in a predominantly black neighborhood. One afternoon, as he was leaving the clinic, he ran into Dr. Michael Torres, an old colleague from St. Elizabeth's. The two men stared at each other awkwardly for a moment before Michael broke the silence. "Richard, I hardly recognized you," he said, taking in Allen's casual attire and the bags under his eyes. Allen managed a weak smile. "It's been an educational few weeks, Michael." Dr. Torres nodded, his expression a mix of curiosity and caution. "I heard about what happened at the hospital. It's been the talk of the medical community." Allen winced, but forced himself to meet his former colleague's eyes. "I made a lot of mistakes, Michael. I'm trying to learn from them now." As they talked, Allen found himself opening up about his experiences since leaving St. Elizabeth's. To his surprise, Dr. Torres listened without judgment, even offering words of encouragement. "You know," Torres said as they were parting, "it takes a big person to admit they were wrong and try to change. Not everyone would have the courage to do what you're doing." Allen felt a small spark of hope at these words. Maybe, just maybe, there was a path to redemption for him. Back at St. Elizabeth's, Simone's influence was growing. She had become a regular speaker at staff meetings, eloquently advocating for change and inspiring others to speak up about their experiences. During one such meeting, Simone noticed Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of cardiology, watching her intently. As the meeting wrapped up, Dr. Chen approached her. "Ms. Johnson," she began, her tone more warm than in their previous interactions, "I wanted to let you know that I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how addressing these issues could improve patient care." Simone nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Well," Dr. Chen went on, "I've started looking into some studies on racial disparities in cardiac care. The data, it's eye-opening to say the least. I think there might be some changes we need to make in our department." Simone felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly the kind of shift in perspective she had been hoping for. "That's fantastic, Dr. Chen. I'd be happy to work with you on developing some new protocols if you're interested." As they discussed potential collaborations, Simone realized that her campaign was evolving. It wasn't just about calling out injustice anymore. It was about working together to find solutions. The following week, Simone received an unexpected email. The sender's name made her pause: Richard Allen. Her finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won out. She opened the message. "Ms. Johnson, I hope this email finds you well. I've been following the news about your campaign at St. Elizabeth's, and I wanted to reach out. What happened between us was inexcusable, and I take full responsibility for my actions. Since leaving the hospital, I've been on a journey of self-education and reflection. I know I have a long way to go, but I wanted to offer my support for your efforts. If there's any way I can contribute to your campaign, even if it's just by sharing my story as a cautionary tale, please let me know. Sincerely, Richard Allen." Simone read the email several times, her emotions swirling. Part of her wanted to dismiss it as a ploy for sympathy, but another part recognized the potential value in Allen's offer. After much consideration, she drafted a careful reply, agreeing to meet with him to discuss how he might contribute to the campaign. As the weeks turned into months, St. Elizabeth's Hospital began to change. New policies were implemented, training programs were launched, and slowly but surely, the culture began to shift. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There was resistance from some quarters and setbacks along the way, but Simone and her allies persevered. 1 year after the incident that had started it all, Simone stood before a packed auditorium at a hospital-wide diversity and inclusion conference. As she looked out at the sea of faces, doctors, nurses, administrators, and support staff of all races and backgrounds, she felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. "We've come a long way," she began, But our journey is far from over. True change doesn't happen overnight. It requires ongoing commitment, constant vigilance, and a willingness to keep learning and growing. As she spoke, Simone caught sight of familiar faces in the crowd. There was Maria, the senior nurse who had first supported her. Dr. Chen, now one of the most vocal advocates for change in the cardiology department. And in the back, sitting quietly but attentively, was Richard Allen. Each of us has a role to play in creating a more equitable and inclusive healthcare system, Simone continued. Whether we're learning from past mistakes, speaking up against injustice, or working to implement new policies, every action counts. As her speech drew to a close, the auditorium erupted in applause. Simone felt a wave of emotion wash over her. This wasn't the end of their journey, but it was a significant milestone. Later, as she mingled with conference attendees, Simone found herself face to face with Richard Allen for the first time since that fateful day in his office. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice humble, "I just wanted to thank you. Not just for allowing me to be part of this, but for opening my eyes. You've changed more lives than you know." Simone studied him for a moment, seeing the genuine change in his demeanor. "Thank you, Dr. Allen," she replied. "But remember, this isn't about any one person. It's about creating a better system for everyone." As Allen nodded and moved away, Simone turned to survey the room once more. She saw colleagues engaged in animated discussions, sharing ideas and experiences. She saw hope for a future where healthcare would be truly equitable. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but looking at the diverse group of committed individuals around her, Simone knew that together they could make a real and lasting difference. The success of St. Elizabeth's Hospital's diversity and inclusion initiatives had not gone unnoticed in the broader medical community. As word spread, Simone found herself fielding requests for interviews, speaking engagements and consultations from other healthcare institutions, eager to replicate their success. Recognizing the opportunity to expand their impact, Simone decided to organize a large-scale conference at St. Elizabeth's, inviting healthcare professionals from across the country to discuss the impact of systemic racism on healthcare outcomes. The weeks leading up to the conference were a whirlwind of activity. Simone worked tirelessly with her team to coordinate speakers, arrange panels, and ensure that every aspect of the event would contribute to meaningful dialogue and actionable plans. On the morning of the conference, Simone stood at the podium in the hospital's largest auditorium, looking out at a sea of faces. The room was packed, with attendees spilling out into the hallways. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice clear and confident. "We're here today to address one of the most critical issues facing our healthcare system, the impact of systemic racism on patient care and outcomes. This isn't just about individual biases or isolated incidents. It's about the deeply ingrained practices and policies that have led to disparities in healthcare access, treatment, and outcomes for communities of color." As Simone introduced the first speaker, a renowned epidemiologist presenting data on racial disparities in COVID-19 outcomes, she noticed a familiar face slipping into the back of the room. Richard Allen had arrived, looking slightly out of place but determined to be there. Throughout the day, speakers from various specialties presented their research and experiences. Dr. Sarah Chen, now a vocal advocate for change within St. Elizabeth's, led a panel discussion on addressing racial bias in cardiac care. "We found that Black patients were less likely to receive certain diagnostic tests and interventions, even when presenting with the same symptoms as white patients," Dr. Chen explained. "By implementing standardized protocols and regular bias training, we've begun to close this gap, but there's still work to be done." As the conference progressed, Simone was heartened to see the level of engagement from attendees. People were asking tough questions, sharing their own experiences, and actively brainstorming solutions. During the lunch break, Simone found herself approached by Dr. Allen. He seemed hesitant, almost nervous. "Ms. Johnson," he began, "I was wondering if I might have a word with you." Simone nodded, curious about what he had to say. "I've been listening to the speakers today, Alan continued, "and it's made me realize how much I still have to learn. But it's also made me think about my own experiences and how I might be able to contribute." Simone raised an eyebrow, encouraging him to go on. "I was thinking," Alan said, taking a deep breath, "that I might share my story, not to excuse my past behavior, but to illustrate how deeply ingrained these biases can be, even in those who consider themselves colorblind. To show that change is possible, but it requires active effort and constant self-reflection." Simone considered his proposal carefully. It was a risk. Some might see it as giving a platform to someone who had been part of the problem, but it could also be a powerful testament to the possibility of change. "Okay," she said finally, "but I want to be clear. This isn't about redemption or forgiveness. It's about education and progress. Can you handle that?" Alan nodded solemnly. "Absolutely. That's exactly what I want to contribute to." As the afternoon session began, Simone took the stage to introduce an unexpected addition to the program. "Our next speaker offers a unique perspective," she began. "Dr. Richard Allen was once known for his surgical skills, but also for his discriminatory behavior. Today, he's here to share his journey of recognition and change. I ask that you listen with open minds, not to excuse past actions, but to understand how deeply these biases can run and what it takes to overcome them." As Alan took the stage, a murmur ran through the crowd. He looked out at the audience, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "A year ago, I would have told you that I didn't have a racist bone in my body," he started. "I would have said that I treated all my patients and colleagues equally. I would have been wrong." He went on to detail his past behavior, the incident with Simone that led to his dismissal, and the difficult journey of self-reflection and education he had undergone since then. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness or to paint myself as a hero," Alan concluded. "I'm here to tell you that if someone like me, someone who was so certain of their own righteousness, can begin to recognize and address their biases, then anyone can. It's not easy, it's often painful, but it's necessary if we want to create a truly equitable healthcare system." As Alan left the stage, the room was silent for a moment before erupting into discussion. Some people were nodding thoughtfully, others were engaged in heated debates with their neighbors. Simone knew that Alan's speech had struck a chord, for better or worse. The conference concluded with a panel discussion on implementing systemic changes in healthcare institutions. As Simone listened to the passionate exchanges between panelists and audience members, she felt a surge of hope. The conversations happening here today would lead to real, tangible changes in hospitals and clinics across the country. As the attendees filed out of the auditorium, many stopped to thank Simone for organizing the event. She was touched by the number of people who told her that the conference had opened their eyes or given them new tools to address issues in their own institutions. Later that evening, as Simone was gathering her things to leave, she found a note left on the podium. It was from Richard Allen. "Ms. Johnson," it read, "thank you for giving me the opportunity to contribute today. I know that one speech doesn't erase the harm I've done, but I hope it might help prevent others from making the same mistakes. Your leadership has transformed not just St. Elizabeth's, but the lives of countless individuals, including my own. The work you're doing is invaluable, and I'm honored to have played even a small part in it." Simone folded the note and slipped it into her bag, her emotions mixed. Alan's journey was a reminder of how far they'd come, but also of how much work still lay ahead. As she left the hospital, stepping out into the cool evening air, Simone felt a renewed sense of purpose. The conference had been a success, but it was just one step on a long journey. There would be more challenges ahead, more minds to change, more systems to overhaul. But looking back at the illuminated hospital behind her, Simone knew that they were on the right path. Change was happening, one conversation, one policy, one institution at a time, and she was ready to lead the way. The days following the conference were a blur of activity for Simone. Her inbox was flooded with emails from attendees, thanking her for the event and sharing their plans to implement changes in their own institutions. The local media had picked up on the story, and Simone found herself giving interviews to newspapers and radio stations. 1 week after the conference, Simone sat in her office, reviewing the feedback and follow-up reports. She couldn't help but feel a sense of pride at what they had accomplished. However, she knew that the real work was only beginning. It was one thing to inspire people at a conference. It was another to ensure that inspiration translated into lasting change. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Maria, the senior nurse who had been one of her earliest supporters. "Simone," Maria said, her face beaming, "you're not going to believe this. The board just announced a new diversity initiative for hiring and promotions. They're implementing a lot of the recommendations from your proposal." Simone's eyes widened in surprise. She had been pushing for these changes for months, but progress had been slow. "That's incredible, Maria. Do you have the details?" As Maria filled her in on the new policies, Simone felt a wave of excitement. This was a significant step forward for St. Elizabeth's. Later that afternoon, Simone headed to a scheduled meeting with Dr. Harrison, the Chief of Staff. As she entered his office, she was surprised to see Richard Allen there as well. Dr. Harrison gestured for her to take a seat. "Ms. Johnson, thank you for joining us. Dr. Allen here has an interesting proposition, and I wanted you to be part of this discussion." Simone turned to Allen, her expression curious but cautious. Allen cleared his throat. "Ms. Johnson, after the conference I've been doing a lot of thinking. I want to do more than just talk about change. I want to actively contribute to making it happen." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I'm proposing to establish a foundation that would fund diversity initiatives in healthcare institutions across the country. Scholarships for underrepresented minorities in medicine, grants for hospitals to implement bias training programs, research into health disparities, that sort of thing." Simone listened, her mind racing with the possibilities. "That sounds promising, Dr. Allen, but why involve me in this discussion?" "Because," Allen replied, "I want St. Elizabeth's to be the first beneficiary of this foundation, and I want you to be on the board of directors. Your insights and experience would be invaluable in ensuring the foundation's efforts are effectively targeted." Simone sat back, stunned. This was a major development, one that could have far-reaching implications. She turned to Dr. Harrison. "And the hospital is on board with this?" Dr. Harrison nodded. "We believe this could be a significant opportunity for St. Elizabeth's to become a leader in promoting diversity and equality in healthcare. But we wanted your input before moving forward." Simone took a deep breath, considering the proposal. It was an exciting opportunity, but she also had reservations. "Dr. Allen," she said carefully, "I appreciate this offer. But I have to ask, why now? And why me?" Allen met her gaze steadily. "Because you were the catalyst for my own change, Ms. Johnson, and because I've seen firsthand the impact of your work here at St. Elizabeth's. I believe that with your guidance, this foundation could make a real difference." Simone nodded slowly. "I'll need time to think about this. And if I agree, I'll want to ensure that the foundation's efforts are truly focused on systemic change, not just surface-level fixes." "Of course," Allen agreed. "Take all the time you need, and I'm open to any suggestions you have for structuring the foundation and its initiatives." As Simone left the meeting, her mind was whirling with possibilities. This could be an incredible opportunity to expand the impact of their work beyond St. Elizabeth's, but it also came with risks. She would need to think carefully about how to proceed. Over the next few days, Simone consulted with her allies at the hospital, seeking their opinions on Allen's proposal. The reactions were mixed. Some were excited about the potential resources and reach such a foundation could provide. Others were wary, concerned about Allen's motivations and the optics of partnering with someone who had been part of the problem. After much deliberation, Simone decided to accept the offer, but with conditions. She insisted on a diverse board of directors, transparent decision-making processes, and a focus on supporting grassroots initiatives led by people of color. When she communicated her decision to Alan and Dr. Harrison, they readily agreed to her terms. The process of establishing the foundation began, with Simone deeply involved in shaping its mission and strategies. As news of the foundation spread, Simone found herself once again in the spotlight. Some praised her for her pragmatism and vision, seeing the foundation as a way to leverage resources for meaningful change. Others criticized her, accusing her of selling out or giving Alan an easy path to redemption. Through it all, Simone remained focused on the potential impact of their work. She knew that change often came with controversy, and she was prepared to weather the criticisms as long as they were making progress. One evening, as Simone was leaving the hospital after a long day of meetings, she ran into Dr. Sarah Chen in the parking lot. "Simone," Dr. Chen called out, hurrying to catch up with her. "I wanted to talk to you about the foundation." Simone braced herself, unsure of what to expect. "I just wanted to say, Doctor," Chen continued, "that I think you're doing the right thing. It's not an easy decision, I know, but the resources this foundation can provide, they could make a real difference." Simone felt a wave of relief. "Thank you, Dr. Chen. That means a lot coming from you." Dr. Chen smiled. "You know, when you first started this campaign, I was skeptical. I thought you were being idealistic, maybe even naive. But you've proven me wrong at every turn. You've changed this hospital, Simone. And now you're poised to change the entire healthcare system." As they parted ways, Simone felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready for the challenge. She knew that every policy changed, every mind opened, every barrier broken down was a step towards a more equitable healthcare system. The foundation was just the beginning. There would be more battles to fight, more systems to change, more hearts and minds to reach. But looking back at the hospital, remembering how far they'd come, Simone felt confident. They were making progress, one step at a time, and she was determined to keep pushing forward, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. As the weeks passed, Simone found herself juggling her nursing duties with her increasing responsibilities related to the new foundation. The workload was intense, but she was energized by the potential for change. One morning, Simone arrived at the hospital early for a meeting with Richard Allen to discuss the foundation's first initiatives. As she entered the conference room, she found Alan already there, surrounded by stacks of papers and a laptop. "Good morning, Ms. Johnson," Alan greeted her, his tone respectful but warm. "I hope you don't mind, but I've been going through some data I think you'll find interesting." Simone took a seat across from him, curious. "What kind of data?" Alan turned his laptop towards her. "I've been compiling statistics on healthcare disparities across different hospitals in the state. I thought it might help us target our initial efforts more effectively." As Simone leaned in to look at the graphs and charts on the screen, she felt a mix of emotions. Part of her was impressed by Alan's initiative and the thoroughness of his research. Another part remained cautious, still not entirely trusting his motivations. "This is comprehensive," Simone said, her tone measured. "How long have you been working on this?" Alan looked slightly sheepish. "To be honest, I haven't been sleeping much lately. This work, it's opened my eyes to so many issues I was blind to before. I feel like I have a lot of catching up to do." Simone nodded, understanding the feeling all too well. "Well, let's go through this data together. I think it could be very useful in shaping our strategy." For the next few hours, Simone and Alan pored over the statistics, identifying patterns and discussing potential interventions. Despite her initial reservations, Simone found herself impressed by Alan's insights and his genuine commitment to the cause. As they wrapped up their meeting, Alan hesitated before speaking. "Ms. Johnson, Simone, if I may. I know our working relationship is still new and fragile, but I want you to know how much I respect the work you're doing. You've taught me more than you know." Simone met his gaze, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "Thank you, Dr. Allen. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the effort you're putting into this foundation. Just remember, this isn't about personal redemption. It's about creating lasting change." Alan nodded solemnly. "I understand, and I'm committed to that goal, whatever it takes." As Simone left the meeting, she felt a cautious optimism. Maybe, just maybe, this unlikely partnership could lead to real progress. Over the next few weeks, Simone and her team worked tirelessly to launch the Foundation's first initiatives. They started with a scholarship program for underrepresented minorities in medical school and a grant program for hospitals to implement comprehensive bias training. The response was overwhelming. Applications poured in from across the country, each one representing a potential for change. Simone found herself working late into the night, reviewing proposals and coordinating with the Foundation's board. One evening, as Simone was leaving her office, she ran into James, the resident who had been part of her initial support group. "Simone!" James called out, jogging to catch up with her. "I've been meaning to talk to you. I just heard about the Foundation's new grant program." Simone smiled, noticing the excitement in James's voice. "What do you think? Are you considering applying?" James nodded enthusiastically. "Actually, a group of us residents have been working on a proposal. We want to create a mentorship program for minority medical students to help them navigate the challenges we've faced." "That sounds fantastic, James," Simone said, genuinely impressed. "I'd love to hear more about it." As James outlined their plans, Simone felt a surge of pride. This was exactly the kind of grassroots initiative she had hoped the Foundation would inspire and support. The next day, Simone had a scheduled meeting with Dr. Sarah Chen to discuss the cardiology department's progress on addressing racial disparities in care. As she entered Dr. Chen's office, she was surprised to see several other department heads there as well. Dr. Chen greeted her with a smile. "Simone, thank you for coming. We've actually been discussing some interdepartmental initiatives we'd like to propose." For the next hour, Simone listened as the department heads outlined their plans. They had identified several areas where racial disparities in care crossed departmental lines, and they wanted to implement coordinated strategies to address these issues. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Chen pulled Simone aside. "You know, when you first started this campaign, I thought it would be a flash in the pan. But look at what you've inspired. You've changed the culture of this entire hospital, Simone." Simone felt a lump in her throat, touched by Dr. Chen's words. "It's not just me, Dr. Chen. It's everyone who's been willing to listen, learn, and change, including you." As Simone walked back to her office, she reflected on how far they had come. The hospital that had once tolerated Dr. Allen's behavior was now at the forefront of addressing systemic racism in healthcare. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges and setbacks, but the progress was undeniable. Later that week, Simone received an unexpected visitor in her office. It was Charles Miller, her father, whom she hadn't seen in person for several weeks due to their busy schedules. "Dad!" Simone exclaimed, rising to greet him with a hug. "What brings you here?" Charles smiled, his eyes twinkling with pride. Can't a father visit his daughter at work, especially when that daughter is making headlines with her groundbreaking initiatives? Simone laughed, gesturing for him to take a seat. "I'm hardly making headlines, Dad." "Oh, no?" Charles raised an eyebrow, pulling out a folded newspaper from his jacket. "Then what's this?" Simone took the paper, her eyes widening as she saw the headline. "St. Elizabeth's Hospital leads the way in healthcare equality." The article detailed the hospital's recent initiatives and the newly established foundation, with Simone featured prominently as a driving force behind the changes. I had no idea," Simone stammered, overwhelmed by the recognition. Charles reached out, squeezing her hand. "You've done something remarkable here, Simone. You took a painful experience and turned it into a catalyst for change. I couldn't be prouder." As Charles left, promising to take her to dinner soon to celebrate, Simone sat back in her chair, rereading the article. She thought about the long journey that had led to this point, the confrontation with Dr. Allen, the countless meetings and strategy sessions, the setbacks and victories. There was still so much work to be done. The foundation was just getting started, and changing entrenched systems would be a long, challenging process. But looking at the article, seeing the tangible impact of their efforts, Simone felt a renewed sense of determination. She picked up her phone, sending a quick message to her team. "Great work, everyone, but let's not rest on our laurels. We're just getting started." As she set the phone down, Simone turned to her computer, ready to dive back into work. The path ahead was long, but she was ready for the challenge. One step at a time, they were changing the face of healthcare, and Simone was determined to keep pushing forward, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. As the Foundation's initiatives began to take root, Simone found herself increasingly in the public eye. Requests for interviews and speaking engagements poured in, and she struggled to balance her newfound celebrity with her ongoing responsibilities at the hospital. One crisp autumn morning, Simone arrived at work to find an unexpected visitor waiting in her office. Charles Miller, her father, sat in one of the guest chairs, a pensive expression on his face. "Dad," Simone said, surprised, "is everything okay?" Charles stood, embracing his daughter warmly. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. I just wanted to talk to you about something important." As they settled into their seats, Charles leaned forward, his expression serious. "I've been watching everything you've accomplished here, Simone. The changes you've made at St. Elizabeth's, the Foundation, the impact you're having on the broader healthcare system. It's incredible." Simone felt a mix of pride and uncertainty at her father's words. "Thank you, Dad, but I sense there's a but coming." Charles chuckled softly. "You always could read me like a book. Yes, there is a but. I've been thinking about Dr. Allen and his role in all of this." Simone tensed slightly. Her father had been supportive of her decision to work with Allen on the Foundation, but she knew he still harbored some resentment towards the man who had humiliated his daughter. "What about him?" Simone asked cautiously. Charles took a deep breath. "I've been watching him too, Simone, and I have to admit I'm impressed by the efforts he's making. The man seems genuinely committed to change." Simone nodded slowly. "He's been working hard, that's true. But Dad, why are you telling me this?" "Because," Charles said, his voice soft but firm, "I think it might be time for me to have a conversation with him. To clear the air, so to speak." Simone's eyes widened in surprise. "Are you sure, Dad? You don't have to do that. Dr. Allen and I have a professional relationship now, but that doesn't mean you need to forgive him." Charles reached out, taking his daughter's hand. "Simone, you've taught me so much through all of this. About the importance of growth, of second chances. If I hold on to my anger, I'm not honoring the work you're doing." Tears pricked at Simone's eyes as she squeezed her father's hand. "Dad, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Charles replied with a gentle smile. "Just keep doing what you're doing. You're changing the world, one step at a time." As Charles left, Simone sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the conversation. Her father's willingness to reconcile with Dr. Allen was a powerful testament to the ripple effect of their work. Later that day, Simone found herself in a meeting with Richard Allen, discussing the latest data from their scholarship program. As they pored over the statistics, Simone couldn't help but observe the change in Allen. The arrogant surgeon she had first encountered was gone, replaced by a man who seemed genuinely passionate about creating change. "Dr. Allen," Simone said during a lull in the conversation, "I wanted to let you know that my father is considering reaching out to you. To talk." Allen looked up, surprise and a hint of apprehension in his eyes. "Mr. Miller? I'm not sure what to say. Is he still angry?" Simone shook her head. "He's been watching the work we're doing. He says he's impressed by your commitment to change." Allen was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I would welcome the opportunity to speak with him, to apologize properly, and to thank him." "Thank him?" Simone asked, puzzled. Allen nodded. Yes. If he hadn't confronted me that day, if he hadn't stood up for you, I might never have been forced to confront my own biases. In a way, he set me on this path of change. As they resumed their work, Simone found herself reflecting on the unexpected ways their campaign had touched lives and transformed relationships. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The foundation launched a new initiative focused on addressing maternal mortality rates among women of color, an issue close to Simone's heart. She threw herself into the work, coordinating with researchers, healthcare providers, and community organizations. One evening, as Simone was preparing to leave the hospital after a long day, she received a text from her father. "Had dinner with Dr. Allen tonight. A lot of healing happened. Proud of you, sweetheart." Simone felt a wave of emotion wash over her. The reconciliation between her father and Dr. Allen symbolized so much of what she had been working towards: growth, understanding, and the power of second chances. As she walked to her car, lost in thought, she nearly collided with Dr. Sarah Chen. "Simone!" Dr. Chen exclaimed. "I'm glad I caught you. Do you have a minute?" Simone nodded, curious about the excitement in Dr. Chen's voice. "I wanted to let you know, Doctor," Chen continued, "that the board has made a decision. They're creating a new position, Chief Diversity Officer, and they want you to fill it." Simone felt her breath catch. "What? Are you serious?" Dr. Chen beamed. "Absolutely serious. They recognize the impact you've had, both within the hospital and beyond. They want to make your role official, give you the resources and authority to continue driving change." As the news sank in, Simone felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. This was an incredible opportunity, a chance to institutionalize the changes they had been fighting for. But it also meant stepping away from her hands-on nursing role, a prospect that filled her with some sadness. "Can I have some time to think about it?" Simone asked. Dr. Chen nodded understandingly. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Simone, for what it's worth, I think you'd be perfect for this role. You've already been doing the work. This just makes it official." As Simone drove home that night, her mind raced with possibilities. The Chief Diversity Officer role would allow her to impact policy at the highest levels, to shape the culture of the entire hospital. But it would also mean less time with patients, less time on the front lines of care. She thought about her journey, from a nurse facing discrimination to a leader in the fight for healthcare equality. She thought about Dr. Allen's transformation, her father's growth, the changes she had seen in colleagues like Dr. Chen. As she pulled into her driveway, Simone made her decision. She would accept the position. From this new platform, she could continue to drive change, to fight for equality, to ensure that every patient received the care and respect they deserved. Tomorrow, she would inform the board of her decision, but tonight, she allowed herself a moment to reflect on how far they had come, and to dream about the changes still to come. The work was far from over, but with each step they were moving closer to a truly equitable healthcare system. Simone smiled to herself as she entered her home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and she was ready to face them head-on, armed with determination, compassion, and the unwavering belief that change was possible. The news of Simone's appointment as Chief Diversity Officer spread quickly through St. Elizabeth's Hospital. Most staff members reacted with enthusiasm, seeing it as a natural progression of the changes Simone had already set in motion. However, as with any significant shift in an organization, there were pockets of resistance and skepticism. Simone's first week in her new role was a whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and strategy sessions. She was determined to hit the ground running, to show that her appointment was more than just a symbolic gesture. On a busy Thursday afternoon, Simone was reviewing a draft of a new hospital-wide diversity training program when her assistant knocked on her office door. "Ms. Johnson, there's something you need to see," the assistant said, her voice tense. She handed Simone a tablet open to an online medical forum. Simone's eyes widened as she read the anonymous post. It was a detailed account of Dr. Allen's past behavior, including incidents that predated his confrontation with Simone. The Post questioned the sincerity of Alan's change and criticized St. Elizabeth's for partnering with him on the foundation. "How long has this been up?" Simone asked, her mind racing. "It was posted early this morning," her assistant replied. "It's already gaining traction on social media." Simone leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of this new challenge. She had known that Dr. Allen's past would always be a potential liability, but she had hoped that his genuine efforts to change and make amends would be enough. Now, it seemed, they were facing a crisis that could undermine everything they had worked for. She quickly arranged an emergency meeting with Dr. Harrison, Dr. Chen, and the hospital's PR team. As they gathered in the conference room, the tension was palpable. "This could seriously damage our reputation," Dr. Bai, Harrison said, his face grim. "People might think we're not serious about addressing discrimination if we're working with someone who has a history of such behavior." Dr. Chen nodded in agreement. "We need to get ahead of this. Maybe distance ourselves from Dr. Allen, at least temporarily." Simone listened to their concerns, understanding the impulse to protect the hospital's image. But something didn't sit right with her. "If we distance ourselves from Dr. Allen now, aren't we going against everything we've been preaching about growth and second chances?" The room fell silent as her words sank in. "But what's the alternative?" the PR director asked. "If we stand by him, we risk being seen as hypocrites." Simone took a deep breath, her mind working quickly. "What if we face this head-on? We've always said that our work is about transformation, not just of systems, but of people. Dr. Allen's journey is a powerful example of that transformation." She paused, looking around the room. "I propose we hold a press conference. We address the allegations openly, acknowledge Dr. Allen's past mistakes, but also highlight the genuine changes he's made and the positive impact of our partnership." The group discussed the idea, weighing the risks and potential benefits. Finally, Dr. Harrison nodded. "It's a bold move, Simone, but I think you're right. It's in line with our values, and it shows that we're not afraid to tackle difficult issues head-on." As the meeting concluded, Simone felt a mix of determination and anxiety. This would be a critical test of their commitment to their principles. The next day, as Simone was preparing for the press conference, she received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Allen knocked on her office door, his face pale and drawn. "Simone, I've just seen the online post," he said, his voice strained. "I wanted to talk to you before the press conference. I think maybe I should step down from the foundation." Simone gestured for him to sit. "Dr. Allen, we knew this might happen someday. Your past isn't a secret." Allen nodded, his eyes downcast. "I know, but I never wanted to be a liability to the work we're doing. Maybe it would be better if I stepped aside." Simone studied him for a moment, seeing the genuine anguish in his expression. "Dr. Allen, do you remember what I said to you when we started this partnership? That it wasn't about personal redemption, but about creating lasting change?" "I remember," Allen replied softly. "Well, that's still true," Simone continued. "But I've realized something over these past months. Your journey, from who you were to who you are now, that is part of the change we're trying to create. It shows that people can grow, can learn, can do better." Allen looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I won't lie to you," Simone said firmly. "This is going to be difficult. We're going to face a lot of criticism. But if we handle this right, it could be a powerful example of the transformation we're advocating for." As they discussed the approach for the press conference, Simone felt a renewed sense of purpose. This crisis, challenging as it was an opportunity to demonstrate their commitment to their principles. The press conference was tense, with reporters firing tough questions about Dr. Allen's past and the hospital's decision to partner with him. Simone stood at the podium, her voice steady as she addressed the allegations. "We do not deny or excuse Dr. Allen's past behavior. she said clearly. "It was unacceptable and it caused real harm. But we also believe in the power of education, of growth, of transformation. Doctor, Alan has not only acknowledged his mistakes, but has actively worked to educate himself and others about the impact of discrimination in healthcare." She went on to detail the concrete steps Alan had taken, the initiatives he had supported, and the positive outcomes of their partnership. "Our work is about creating systemic change," Simone concluded. "That includes changing hearts and minds. Dr. Allen's journey is a testament to the possibility of that change. We stand by our partnership, not in spite of his past, but because of how he has chosen to learn from it and work towards a more equitable future." As the press conference ended, Simone knew that they had a long road ahead. The controversy wouldn't disappear overnight. But she also felt a sense of pride in how they had chosen to handle it. Later that evening, as Simone was packing up to leave, she received a call from her father. "I saw the press conference," Charles said, his voice warm with pride. "You handled that beautifully, Simone. You're showing the world what true leadership looks like." As she hung up, Simone reflected on the day's events. The road ahead would be challenging, but she was more convinced than ever that they were on the right path. They had faced this crisis with honesty, integrity, and a commitment to their values. Whatever came next, she knew they would face it together, continuing to push for the changes they believed in. In the weeks following the press conference, St. Elizabeth's Hospital found itself at the center of a national conversation about accountability, forgiveness, and institutional change. While some praised Simone and the hospital for their transparency and commitment to transformation, others remained skeptical, arguing that Dr. Allen's past actions were unforgivable. Simone knew that the real test would be in how they moved forward. She doubled down on her efforts, pushing for even more comprehensive diversity initiatives and transparency in the hospital's operations. One morning, as Simone was reviewing the latest data on their hiring practices, her assistant interrupted with an urgent message. "Ms. Johnson, Dr. Chen needs to see you immediately. She says it's crucial." Simone hurried to Dr. Chen's office, her mind racing with possibilities. As she entered, she found Dr. Chen looking uncharacteristically agitated. "Simone, we have a situation," Dr. Chen said without preamble. "I've just received an anonymous tip about some disturbing practices in our emergency department. Apparently there's evidence of racial profiling in pain management decisions." Simone felt her heart sink. Despite all their efforts, it seemed that deeply ingrained biases were still affecting patient care. "What kind of evidence are we talking about?" "Doctor," Chen handed her a file. "Statistical analysis showing significant disparities in how pain medication is prescribed based on the patient's race. And there are some troubling anecdotal reports as well." Simone skimmed the document, her frown deepening with each page. "This is serious, Dr. Chen. We need to investigate this thoroughly and immediately." "I agree," Dr. Chen nodded. "But Simone, there's more. The source of this information. They're threatening to go public if we don't take action within 48 hours. Simone sat back, her mind working quickly. This situation had the potential to undo much of the progress they had made. But it also presented an opportunity to demonstrate their commitment to real, systemic change. "Okay," Simone said, her voice firm. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we launch an immediate independent investigation into these claims. We bring in external experts to ensure complete impartiality." Dr. Chen nodded, taking notes. "Second," Simone continued, "we're going to get ahead of this. We call a staff meeting, all departments, all levels. We present this information ourselves before it can be leaked. We make it clear that this kind of bias, whether conscious or unconscious, is unacceptable." "And if the claims are substantiated?" Dr. Chen asked. "Then we take decisive action," Simone replied without hesitation. "Retraining, policy changes, and yes, if necessary, dismissals. We've come too far to allow this kind of discrimination to continue." Over the next 24 hours, Simone and her team worked tirelessly to set their plan in motion. The all-staff meeting was tense, with shocked murmurs rippling through the audience as Simone presented the allegations. "I know this is difficult to hear," Simone said, her voice carrying through the packed auditorium. "But we cannot shy away from uncomfortable truths. If these allegations are true, it means we still have a lot of work to do, and we will do that work together." As the investigation got underway, Simone found herself working closely with Dr. Allen. His expertise in emergency medicine was valuable, and his commitment to the cause seemed stronger than ever in the face of this new challenge. "You know," Allen said to her one evening as they pored over hospital protocols, "a year ago I might have dismissed these allegations outright. I would have defended the department without question." Simone looked up, curiosity in her eyes. "And now?" Allen sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Now I know better. I understand how deep these biases can run, how they can affect our judgment without us even realizing it. It's humbling." As the investigation progressed, a complex picture began to emerge. While there was no evidence of deliberate racial profiling, the data did show troubling disparities in pain management practices. More disturbingly, interviews with staff revealed a culture of unconscious bias that had gone unchallenged for years. Simone knew they needed to take decisive action. In a meeting with the board, she presented a comprehensive plan for addressing the issue. "We need a complete overhaul of our pain management protocols," she explained. "Standardized assessment tools, regular audits of prescribing practices, and mandatory training on cultural competence and bias recognition for all clinical staff." The board members listened intently, their expressions a mix of concern and determination. "Furthermore," Simone continued, "I propose we establish a patient advocacy office. This will provide a direct channel for patients to report concerns about their care, including any perceived discrimination." As the board discussed the proposals, Simone felt a tap on her shoulder. It was Richard Allen, a strange expression on his face. "Simone," he said quietly, "there's something you need to know. The anonymous tip, it came from me." Simone stared at him, shocked. "You? But why anonymously? Why the threat to go public?" Allen looked down, shame evident in his posture. "Because I was a coward. I suspected these issues for a while, but I was afraid of the fallout if I came forward openly. I thought an anonymous threat would force quick action." He met her eyes, his gaze steady. "But watching you handle this, seeing your commitment to transparency and change, I realized I was wrong to hide. I'm ready to come forward publicly, to take responsibility for my part in perpetuating these problems in the past, and to fully commit to solving them now." Simone was quiet for a moment, processing this revelation. Then slowly, she nodded. "Thank you for telling me, Dr. Allen. Your honesty now doesn't erase the mistake of the anonymous threat, but it does show how far you've come. We'll need to discuss how to handle this with the board and our legal team." As the meeting concluded, with the board approving Simone's proposals, she felt a mix of emotions. The challenges they faced were significant, but so was their commitment to addressing them. In the following days, as they prepared to go public with their findings and their action plan, Simone reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From her personal experience of discrimination to the hospital-wide reckoning they now faced, every step had been necessary, every challenge an opportunity for growth. The path forward wouldn't be easy. Changing ingrained behaviors and systemic biases was a long-term process, one that would require constant vigilance and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But as Simone looked around at her team, at Dr. Chen's determination, at the board's commitment, at Dr. Allen's willingness to own his mistakes and work for change, she felt a surge of hope. They had come so far, and they still had far to go. But they were moving in the right direction, one step at a time, towards a future where every patient would receive equitable, compassionate care. and Simone was ready to lead the way, no matter what challenges lay ahead. As she prepared for the press conference that would announce their findings and their plan of action, Simone took a deep breath. This wasn't an end, but a new beginning. The real work was just starting, and she was ready for it.